Hello and welcome. I'm joined by BJ Panda, Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha. Mr. Panda, thank you very much for joining us. So let me ask you, 10 months have passed since this new government has come in with a lot of promises that are well documented, well known, discussed and debated. Now, what's your sense, if you were to do a quick economic and social report card of what have been the wins and misses or the hits and misses, what would they be?
Let me do a quick recap of what I think are the three broad areas in which this government has worked. Clearly, right at the beginning, the Prime Minister chose to invest his political capital on foreign policy. And by most accounts, I think he has done a fantastic job in re-establishing India as a hot destination for investment, re-establishing India's image as an emerging economic superpower, and his own image, of course, as a global statesman. The second thing has to do with domestic economy, which a lot of people thought he would start with. But there was a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and starting from the end of last calendar year, with the ordinances that were issued, and now the economic bills that have been passed, I think is a very significant move. Think about this for a moment. The three economic bills that were passed within the last 10 days was the most significant economic legislation in a decade. In the past decade, you've had a lot of social legislation, but no significant economic legislation. Right. People don't realize the trench warfare that's gone on behind the scenes in Parliament to make this possible. So maybe later than foreign policy
management as well.
Yes. Now, on the third issue, which is regarding social issues, the Prime Minister has started speaking up on personal freedoms, on religious freedoms, on the constitutional guarantees to every citizen, including minorities. Perhaps you could argue that he should have started speaking out on this before. But there is a certain thing as a bandwidth that a person or a government or a team can handle. And as long as they can make sure that the message goes out loud and clear, I think they're on a good track.
So you spend a lot of time in your constituency in Orissa. We've seen the new bill for land acquisition, for instance. Are you getting a sense that people are comfortable with things the way they're being presented?
The reality is this. People in India, particularly people who have lost land, have deep suspicions about how their land has been acquired. In Odisha and India, you have claims going back to the 1950s when land was acquired for dams and steel plants, and this never got proper compensation. So people suspect government, they suspect the process of land acquisition. And eminent domain was misused in the past. So now also there is that apprehension, there is that suspicion. I think more needs to be done to communicate that the compensation aspect is not being changed at all. And that in fact the scope of eminent domain is now being narrowed down to the purely public projects, particularly the linear projects like railways and highways and irrigation investment, which does not displace large numbers of people. But this is a work in progress. It's not, you cannot assume that people will just accept it even if it's a good idea. It has to be sold to people.
Right. So if you were to now look ahead, this is in keeping with, let's say, the government's larger thrust on Make in India, absorbing young people coming into the workforce, and the sort of on the juxtaposition with land being the answer to some of these problems. Is this all adding up?
I would put it this way. Clearly, I think a corner has been turned. Because, as I said, the most significant economic legislation in a decade, inflation has been low, it's been fortuitous, oil prices being low, but also a message is going out that investment will not be harassed, business will not be treated shabbily. And this is the first government where a cabinet minister has come out and said that being pro-business is not necessarily anti-poor. These are significant messaging. Now, the question remains to be answered whether these reforms will be sustained or not. Now, even if not much more happens, I think enough has happened that this turnaround will go on for a while. But unless we make further reforms, further down the road, 2 years, 3 years down the road, it's going to get difficult. Land is crucial, but it's not the only thing. You have to look at there's labor laws that could be done. There are other...
the ease of doing business.
The ease of doing business. The Inspector Raj, which still harasses small entrepreneurs, SMEs, big companies, all of this has to change. So I would not like to say that any one thing will hold up the economy, but unless there is action on several fronts, including hopefully on the land front, yes, I think we will face bottlenecks.
So what's the different way to look at it? I mean, you've argued about, looking at India, the United States and China, two different examples.
I used the US and the China example only to show that at both extremes of the political spectrum, there is a certain global norm, and we are an outlier. Now, in the past, eminent domain has been misused in India, but the fact remains we need to discuss what is truly public purpose. Are canals and irrigation public purpose? Are railways public purpose? Are national highways public purpose? This has to be weighed against the consent of people whose land is being lost, and we have to come up with the issue of should people have a veto, and what percentage of people should have a veto, if at all, and most importantly, what is the compensation. I think if we can instill confidence in people that only for the truly, really eminent domain type of approaches for national purpose, defense installations, and the other examples I gave, I think the consent issue can be overcome if the confidence is built among people that the compensation is going to be not only adequate but actually worthwhile. And it is not just a cash compensation. Perhaps there can be some scope of assured jobs and assured other facilities.
Right. So, you know, I started by asking you about a sort of economic and social report card. Let's come to the social report card, on which this government's record perhaps has not been so good. I mean, it's, for instance, it's upset at least two communities, the Muslims and the Christians, for slightly different reasons, coming up to the beef ban and so on. But apart from that, are there things that are still pending? I mean, you were campaigning on the Section 66, you know, arguing for freedom of expression. Somewhere it fits into the larger scheme of things on the social front. Are you getting a sense that things are moving as smoothly?
Well, you know, I would like to see this in a larger periscope, because Section 66A, or the misuse of sedition law, was there even in the previous government, which was avowedly more liberal. The reality is that we are well into the 21st century, but many of our laws are stuck in the 19th century. That needs to be addressed. Fortunately, the courts are stepping in. Supreme Court has struck down 66A, but I wish we had done it in Parliament. There were a few of us, three of us, who were opposing this in Parliament. But yet again, we have yielded ground for the courts to step in and do what is really our job. Similarly, the misuse of the sedition law, only last week the Bombay High Court again stepped in and ruled against it, so that the cartoonist was acquitted. Asim Trivedi was acquitted. The reality is, the IT Act passed in Parliament in a din. It was never discussed, and that was part of the problem. I think more than any governmental attitude or party attitude, I think a large number of legislators never understood the nuances. They never distinguished that A, there is a legitimate interest to regulate online content when it goes to the extent of threatening violence against someone. But that should be distinguished from somebody expressing an opinion. So you can have stalking laws, anti-stalking laws, and you can have laws against somebody threatening to kidnap or harm or murder somebody online or offline, but you cannot limit the freedom of expression that a person has to criticize the government, to criticize parties, to criticize political opinions, to criticize your dress sense. These are freedoms that are guaranteed by our constitution.
Right. So if I were to again try and wrap this all up as a larger sort of social universe, some of which is legacy, as you pointed out, but some of which is current, where do we stand?
We are a work in progress. And
because the economic part is clearer, including, let's say, a land acquisition bill. I mean, that part is clearer, more tangible. But this is intangible, in some ways affects us much more.
Yes. Well, like I said, we are a work in progress. I think India's ethos, forget about our politics, forget about our legislation, I think India's ethos is liberal. Even when you talk to people and tell them that should a cartoonist be arrested, most people will say no. And should school children
You're sure about that?
I travel in the hinterland of India.
Okay.
I meet thousands of people every week personally, and I feel and sense this liberal ethos, which is shocked at the kind of legal restrictions that we have on free speech and free conduct. But also there needs to be public debate. Like I said, just like many legislators did not distinguish between online threatening behavior and online expressive of opinions which may or may not offend someone. Similarly, the general public also needs to understand this distinction better. We need to have a much clearer debate out in the open.
Right, but you're saying that we are a more liberal thinking society, at least as evidenced by the people you meet.
My belief is that Indians, by and large, are liberal at heart. Sometimes an issue can be a little confusing, and they need to understand that better, because if this overlap between threatening behavior and expressive opinion which may or may not be offensive, that distinction is sometimes not understood. So it may feel as if people are not liberal, but if you explain the nuances and you have a discussion with people, more often than not, my experience is that people are able to distinguish between opinion and threats.
You said that this was really a result, I mean, the whole section 66A was in some ways the result of a drafting oversight, error, adventurism, compounded by the fact that legislators didn't pay sufficient attention when they should have done it. But would you worry that there is a residue of this, which is still in the minds of those who want to control and regulate and punish, which perhaps has not been dealt with and should be dealt with?
Well, I think yes, but it has to do with the nature of our politics. I think our politics has become somewhat polarized, and there is a lot of sort of instinctive obstructionist behavior between people who don't agree politically, whereas we should be talking about the principles of the issue. Yes, I think there are remnants of that. I don't think it is limited to any one government or party. As I said, the more sunshine that the more sunlight that you shine on these issues, the better it is for the country.